Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Just a little content warning for this episode. We talk about sexual assault starting around 15 minutes and ending around 23 minutes of this episode. So if you would like to skip it, go ahead. I still hope you listen to the rest of it because it's a really fun episode. Enjoy!
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we're talking about the movie Fury, which came out in 2014. It was written and directed by David Ayer, and it's the fictional tale of an American tank crew fighting their way through Nazi Germany at the end of the war.
Fury should be available on Netflix in most countries.
We are super fortunate this week to have another guest. It's our friend Beck, who has a sort of, I think, love-hate relationship with this movie. But anyway, I wouldn't have watched it in the first place if they hadn't had such interesting commentary on it. And so we thought it would be absolutely important to get them on the podcast and get their take. So welcome back.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on.
For years. Thank you. Yeah, I've been screaming about this movie for years, and it's so nice to finally have someone be like, would you like to scream about it more?
Would you like to scream about it for posterity?
Yeah.
So let's start by giving our general impressions of this movie. And if it's not putting you on the spot too much, Beck, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So overall impressions of the World War II movies that I've watched, which is a pretty considerable number at this point in my history nerd career. It's one of the ones that I like more, even while I have a lot of major issues with it. My feelings are that it is a little bit of an edgelord take on history. It's a little bit on the grimdark side. At the same time, I think that there are really compelling visuals. I think that the characters are really interesting and well acted. And I think that the score is absolutely phenomenal.
I love that you said grimdark because that was exactly sort of what we were talking about last night when we watched it. Martin and I watched it at the same time, which we don't usually do. It was one of those where it's like, oh, all these people hate each other and there's no point to anything and war is hell and no one can be redeemed and no one deserves to be redeemed. And then it's kind of like, well, then what's the point?
Yeah, I was thinking about it before I came on because I was just trying to articulate that feeling into something understandable. And I think that there's a type of person, usually male, not always, but usually male, that has a level of privilege where when they think of oh, the things that man can do to them, they're like, isn't this so scary? Because it never happens to them in real life. So they don't have to worry about the hope that people can be better, because to them, people aren't like that all the time because they don't feel that fear. And to other people who are in different groups who do feel the fear of people being horrible to them for various reasons, you sort of have to believe in a world where people can learn and change and grow and deserve empathy and kindness. And this just smacks to me of a guy who's no one's ever been mean to me, and I don't know why people can be mean to each other, and then they're mean to each other all the time, and everything's horrible and terrible, and the world sucks. And I'm you've never felt true hardship. I'm so sorry.
No, I love that. Mart, what are your thoughts?
I hate this movie. I never want to watch it again. Ever. Ever. If we'd not been recording this podcast, I would have turned it off within the first 5 minutes. So I guess I enjoyed your hate watch it though. Maybe I didn't really give it a fair chance after the first 5 minutes. I just decided that it wasn't for me. And then I've just hated everything since.
I watched it a couple years ago, and my memories of this movie were sometimes it's a bit silly. I remember thinking that if I didn't speak English as a first language, I'd be kind of struggling to understand what everybody was saying. Then when we started watching it again, within the first 20 minutes, I was like, oh yeah, this is that movie with that scene in the middle with the two women. And I was immediately like, oh, damn it. So yeah, also not my favorite war movie. I would say I did enjoy that it was about a tank crew, I guess. It has that going for it. And as you were saying, there was some good acting performances, but by and large, probably not one I would rewatch.
Fair.
Yeah, I'm sick in the head. That's important to note too.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
A little bit.
I don't know, for me, though, every time there was something I was wondering if I could latch onto, the movie then did something to that person or scene that just made it worse again. So I don't know. I just found nothing compelling or something. I couldn't really get into it. Lots of people love this movie, right? It's such a well-loved war movie, and I don't understand it at all.
It's got like a 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, I believe.
I mean, it is definitely like a guys movie for guys about the horrors of war. TM, 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 and like metal font, distressed effect, I think the reason that you wanted to turn it off is the reasons that I keep watching it, where there's these little moments where I'm like, this is so interesting. This is so interesting. The thing that this character just did or said or expressed. Maybe this time the movie will be different.
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's almost a good war movie. It's like, and it just never quite gets there. Or something? Yeah. I don't know.
We sort of had a little discussion about this last night too, where we were talking about how even if a character is in no way redeemable, and some of the characters in this movie suck, it still is important for them to have some facet of humanity that you can latch onto. Like you see them experience grief or whatever it is, and you're like, okay, I get where they're coming from, even if they've done a lot of reprehensible things. And I just thought, like, in this movie, a lot of the characters I was just really struggling to sort of connect with in that way, I guess.
I agree.
It's funny to mention, but since we planned this recording, I've been referring to this movie as Inglourious Basterds the entire time.
Yesterday we were talking about it, and I kept being like, "Okay, I'm gonna watch Fury later. Like, are we gonna watch Fury? Fury?" Then Mart's like, "Hey, I'm ready." She brings it up. It's Inglourious Basterds. I was like, "This is not Fury." I can see how you'd be confused.
I agree. I think Inglourious Basterds is what Fury would be if David Ayer knew how to have fun.
Yeah. Literally, yeah. And I did see a few reviews comparing them and saying that, Fury was sort of a watered down version of Inglourious Basterds with all the fun sucked out. So that sounds about right.
Yeah. If you want the bummer version, watch Fury.
Well, let's get into the plot, y'all.
The movie opens and it's April 1945. We get a little title card first explaining something about the war, and then we open on a smoky battlefield littered with broken up machinery and tanks and bodies. We see a German officer as he rides through the field on a white horse, and he's knocked off his horse by a body slam by Staff Sergeant Don War Daddy Collier, played by Brad Pitt. He's in the 2nd Armored Division.
What you will notice in my notes is that I heavily editorialized, so I am the culprit behind flying body slam. It's just when I saw that it cracked me up.
In the screenplay that I read of this movie, because that's like the kind of nerd I am, at one point David Ayer describes the Nazi piece of artillery as sounding like an evil machine gun. So like, you're good. Flying body slam is like right on.
Worth noting that the white horse is symbolism, and it will come back.
I looked this up because David Ayer said in an interview, he said this was symbolism for Don's soul leaving his body, this white horse. So, I mean, make of that what you will.
I did read that interview with him, and he said the line, I don't know why this made me laugh like out loud, but he said the line, "A horse doesn't know where it is."
He also made them live in the tank. He's like, "I'm a director who'll do anything I need to get the performance out of my actors that I want." And I'm like, well, if you have to do anything to get a performance out of your actors, you're not a fucking good director, dude. I'm sorry.
Exactly. I don't understand. It's like you hire all these people ostensibly because they are good actors. And you're like, the only way they're going to be able to do their job is if I treat them like dog shit. And it's like, well, this is a workplace. And also, like, maybe trust that these people know how to act. I don't know.
I kind of get it if you want to do it for, like, new actors that haven't been around the block. But every single one of these actors is famous. They've been acting for a while.
Well, most of them have already been in a war movie. John Bernthal, like Brad Pitt. A lot of these guys have already been in a war movie. We meet the rest of Collier's Sherman tank crew as they attempt to get the tank repaired and underway again. So we have Gunner Boyd, Bible Swan, played by Shia LaBeouf. Loader Grady, dicey non-PC nickname Travis. I'm not going to say it, but you can watch the movie, played by John Bernthal. And driver Trini Gordo Garcia, played by Michael Pena. And in the tank, there is also the body of assistant driver and bow gunner Red, who has recently been killed.
Not just killed, fucking splattered. So upon meeting the rest of their group, their tank heads back and is assigned a replacement for Red, PFC Norman Ellison, played by sweet, adorable, tiny baby Logan Lerman, who is a typist clerk who did not want to come to combat, is now ready for combat, and everyone hates him. Correct.
Yeah, there's really this movie is the Saving Private Ryan again. It's this trope where it's like the young, inexperienced one who's not ready for combat, and everyone else is battle hardened and weary. And this is taken to the absolute extreme.
Is it just a coincidence that Logan Lerman's character is also a typist? Or is that just done on purpose? It's like, isn't what's his name in Saving Private Ryan also a typist?
No, well, he's a cartographer or something. Isn't he working with maps? Anyway, it doesn't matter. They're both like people who are not ready for combat.
Yeah. Like you were an office guy and we've been running guys.
Also worth noting that everyone in this movie except Logan Lerman is like hella old. Just like Brad Pitt was 50 when this movie was made, and it just seems absolutely wild to me that we're like, yeah, everyone in World War II was old as hell except this one guy, Percy Jackson.
So I read a thing once, and I can't remember who it was that said it, but someone had posited that, like, if Logan Lerman's character, Norman Ellison, is like the POV character for the audience, that we're sort of seeing the respective ages of the rest of the tank crew through his eyes. So it's like a measure of experience. And I was like, there's no way David Ayer put that much thought into this movie. I love where you're going, but there's just no way.
That is really clever, though. If he had intended that, but no, you're right. He definitely didn't.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll know this back because you've seen the script. So we found a mention of a deleted scene that explains why Brad Pitt is so old in this.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely wild scene to cut out because they're like, yeah, so he was going to go to prison, and the judge told him that he could go to prison or the army because he killed his wife and his brother or something like that. And I was like, that is an insane amount of exposition to just not include in the movie.
Yeah. They also say at one point, like, he's been with us since before Africa. And so, like, the timelines in this movie don't make any sense. Like, the places that they are, the places that they're going, the places they say that they came from. I made a spreadsheet with a possible Fury timeline based off the 66 Armored because I was like, I just have to know. I have to know where they could have been. And it's not where they are. That's what I'll tell you. Like, based on everything that is said throughout the movie.
This is why we had to have back on the podcast. Like, what you guys need to understand is that we have so many nerd friends, and it's the best.
We get to know Norman a little. He gets to clean up the tank for a second and puke all over the place. After we get to know him a bit, they are on the move again. He's a gunner, by the way, now in this tank, which is important. He spots a group of Hitler Youth soldiers in the bushes, but he doesn't want to fire on them because they're tiny babies. And that doesn't end up being very prudent of him to not shoot them because they shoot the tank in front of them and brutally kill someone in that tank. And it's horrible.
I can tell you what happens because I just watched that scene this morning. If you would like to, the specific memory of a guy who catches on fire, and then because he's so on fire, he shoots himself in the head. That's his reaction to being on fire. Yeah, like not to stop, drop, and roll, but to pull out his pistol and shoot himself in the head. That's his first instinct.
And it's then Don, or War Daddy, as we should keep calling him because it's ridiculous, completely blames him and smacks him in the face a couple times. And this should give you an idea of the kind of leader he is. And I don't know what anyone on the internet thinks he's a good leader. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's brutal. Although, you know what, though? I wish that we still assign each other cool nicknames. I wish that we had nicknames on this podcast.
Like War Daddy.
Yeah, like War Daddy.
Who do you want to be, Samuel? I'll call you whatever you want.
You can't choose your own nickname. That's not how it works.
Oh, okay. Well,
mine would be, hey, spreadsheet, what's up? No, so lame.
All right, so Fury, which is the name of their tank, which you know because they have painted it on the barrel, is sent by Captain Wagoner, played by Jason Isaac, to lead the rescue of a group of tanks that are pinned down. And once again, Norman hesitates. There's all these anti-tank guns going off. He's freaking out. He's not having a good time. And Don / War Daddy tries to instill some of that good old American killing spirit in Norman by forcing him to kill a captured German soldier, which he obviously does not want to do. That's not his vibe. So Norman tries to refuse, and Don basically like wrestles him to the ground and puts his hand on the gun and his finger on the trigger and forces him to do it. And Norman does not like that at all. But afterward, it's almost like it was like his rite of passage because the crew seems a lot more sympathetic towards him.
Good job. You killed a prisoner. Well done. You're now a part of the criminal soldiers of the Americas.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I remember the first time that War Daddy forced me to kill a man. You know what I mean? Like, the thing that I find so wild about that scene, and I've watched this movie more times than anyone should, is like there's this moment right afterward that I think is supposed to intimate that War Daddy is actually a good leader. It's right after Grady says the first time that we're in a firefight, Don shit his pants so bad that it like stunk up the whole tank. And then he walks up behind them and they all get really quiet because they're like giggling about their leader. And he looks at them and, he's like, Norman, I haven't seen you eat anything today. Make sure you eat something. They like sit on that moment for so long. And you can just tell it's like this button of like, see, he's a good dad. Because even afterwards, like, make sure he sees you eat it. Because like he needs to know that you're taking care of yourself. And I'm like, bitch, this is bad parenting. This is just awful. Like
that feeling when you mentally destroy your child and then you're like, but make sure you have a snack though.
It's a strange definition of tough love, this whole thing.
Super weird one. The rest of the platoon goes to capture the town of Kirkhausen. It's near Stuttgart, kind of by the French border. They like come into this town. There's Nazis holed up in a hotel. They kill the Nazis in the hotel. And then Don and Norman, while Grady and Gordo, like they like guide a woman into their tank. They're like, it's going to be the both of us, just so you know. And I'm like, okay, great. While that's happening, Don and Norman meet these two German women who like welcome them into their apartment. And then this feels like a cutaway to like a weird bad French art house film where it's like a woman cooking eggs while the younger two are like kind of talking. And then Don is basically like, you're going to take that girl into that room and fuck her. And Norman's like, what? And Don's like, just go do it. And he's like, Dad said so I guess I have to.
And also, let's not forget that he says, if you don't do it, I will.
I fast forward through this scene pretty much every time I watch because, first of all, it adds absolutely nothing to the plot. It does not make Norman's character at all sympathetic. In fact, it makes him way less sympathetic than he was before. And in the script that I've seen, there's a part where he tells her that he was born in the call. Like,
what is this thing you're talking about?
Scene, but yeah, so it's like just after this, so we can come back to it. But essentially, he intimates that he has like a sort of sixth sense for bad things that are going to happen, and the bad stuff follows him around because he was born in like this like weird birth shroud. Anyway, it's a fucking weird script, y'all. David Ayers is on an interesting level. I think I might be misremembering where it was in the original script, but it's like in this whole long scene of them being in this terrible apartment. And they don't really show the whole intercourse, which I appreciated because I was like, I don't really need to see all of that happening. But it sucks. It fully sucks. It's bad.
It does. Yeah. We were talking about this last night, saying we're sure that David thought he was writing a romantic little scene. That this wasn't rape, according to him.
Yeah. It's really like the facts of the scene are that like the older man tells the younger man, if you don't rape her, I will. And and she obviously knows that those are the stakes because she like chooses the younger guy as like the lesser of two evils. And then when he goes into the bedroom with her, he has his gun with him the whole time. And it's like, can you even imply consent anyway when it's like soldiers in the home of a civilian? You can tell that like this did not occur to David Ayer at all. It's like, oh, she seems like she might be sort of into it. Ergo, it's not rape.
Well, and it's this weird thing that I see in a lot of like, especially these war movies that are like the really hyper masculine takes on it, where it's like, we got to show that bad things happen to women, but also we're going to like take the teeth out of it in a weird way. Like, but in a very, it's very not self-aware. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very thoughtless.
What's interesting to me too is that as you tell us some more details, or, Mart was talking about that other deleted scene with War Daddy's background in it, it kind of feels like everything in the movie that David Ayer included to give these people like depth and resonance was removed, which I mean, from the sounds of it, it was all wild anyway. And I don't know that it would have made the characters make more sense, but I just thought it was an interesting choice that when they were choosing things to remove, it's like, let's get rid of anything that explains why these characters are doing what they're doing.
100%. Yes. Yeah. Fully agree. Oh, sorry. I'm like stuck in that scene.
I remember the first time that I watched it, I felt like it was so long because obviously I didn't know what was going to happen. This whole scene, there's this like extremely tense. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's this way for men watching the movie, but extremely tense because you don't know if one or both of these women are going to be sexually assaulted. And then it does happen to the one. And then when the other guys come in, you sort of worry that it might happen again. And it's just the whole scene is really a tough watch. And when I watched it again and I became aware that that scene was coming up, I was like, oh, for fuck's sake.
It's really long. So
it's long. Yeah.
I'll just move on to the second part of that scene is when the rest of the crew comes in. You really think it can't get any worse than it already is, and then it does, because the second they come in, it just gets worse and worse and worse. I almost just tuned out for this entire bit, especially the bit where John Bernthal's character gets to have a little rumble. And he's just horrible to both women. And I don't know why anybody in this crew actually likes each other, or why they never call each other out. And the only thing War Daddy seems to be upset about is the fact that he cannot eat his breakfast in peace, which is annoying.
He also tells them that they're not allowed to touch the women, which, number one, we just like watched you tell Norman to like rape one of them. And now I don't understand, like, are we supposed to imply from that he's like innately a good person? I don't know. And like the other guys anyway are behaving so badly that you're like, I don't know that that's going to make a huge difference regardless. Like they're just harassing these women and being awful to them.
Well, and also they establish at the beginning of the movie that these guys don't respect Don. They like yell at him in the tank. They're like, fuck you. You're a bad leader. You are speaking German. Why can't I speak Spanish? Like, you know what I mean? Like they don't respect this guy. They're not going to listen to what he says. They're scared of him, but they don't respect him.
No. There's the moment right before Norman takes the girl into the room where they actually have a nice connection at the piano. I'm like, why can it just not be that tiny thing and just leave it at that? And make it like a genuine moment between those two people. And it's just, it's not. It's just ruined immediately.
The rough part too is that, not to steal the rest of your note from you, but when the crew end up getting called away and they're all like out of the building or whatever, the building gets shelled by German artillery and Emma dies immediately. So it's like, it's one thing to, I don't know if his intention here was to depict like the experience of women in wartime, but it's like, it's these two women who barely speak. We don't know anything about them. One of them gets raped and then they die in a shelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's just, ugh, I hate it.
It feels like this movie is a movie that was made by someone who wanted to be like really, really critical of the war, but somehow it turned through the summer blockbuster machine and made into like a rah-rah America sort of situation. And it's like two different movies combined into one terrible viewing experience.
Yeah, and it's confusing.
I think that too, I mean, there's a little bit where John Bernthal's character tells Norman that he's a good person and he's better than them and all this stuff. And it's one thing if you want to tell the story of soldiers using rape as a weapon of war, because that's a thing that happens all the time and is a story that needs to be told. But then it's like, we're not meant to view that as like a black mark on his character. He's still meant to be this protagonist that we root for. We're supposed to view him as fundamentally a good person who's redeemable. And I don't know, there was really no sense of like cohesiveness in that way.
Yeah, Emma was really just only used to send him over the edge. She was just a device for his character's change. And they're trying to make it like the war is changing him, but it's a bad arc. It's just a really, really bad arc. And it goes really quickly. It's like snap and he's suddenly a different man. I hate it.
Yeah, it's something. It sure is something.
After all of that happens, the platoon is told they're going to hold this important crossroads. It's really critical that you do this. But on their way there, they get attacked by a German Tiger, just one, I think. And the other 3 remaining tanks in their platoon are destroyed. Their tank gets fucked up, so they can't call for reinforcements. And then their tank gets fucked up again, and it can't even move.
I will say, one thing this movie does very well, the tank combat scenes are awesome. I really enjoyed the way that this particular, I mean, it was ridiculous, and there's just no reason, but it looked cool. It looked very cool. And it was awesome that they had the real tanks, some of the last functioning models of these tanks that they had out there. And they were in this movie. This is the movie they got used for.
You know what's so strange about this movie? You can tell that David Ayer did his best to make it like historically accurate in the sense that all the machinery is real. The props department deserves loads of props for doing the inside of the tanks because it's beautiful and gross, but really cool. So there's this one part where he does a really great job of making it look like an actual tank movie. But then the plot is so bad. I'm just like, Why? Why can't you just have made it better?
There was a review on, I don't know if it was Letterboxd or what, but someone said, curious what happens when you go out of your way to be technically historically accurate, but the movie is still dramatically bogus.
I don't understand why the dialogue is not more period accurate, because it's garbage dialogue.
This is not a visual media, but I can't make the sounds of the flailing.
Yeah.
For everybody listening, Beck is just wildly gesturing at the camera right now, just trying to.
Yes.
Yeah. Honestly, it's wild to me because the dialogue feels to me like it was written by a teenage boy. I used to teach high school. I've heard teenage boys talk to each other. But Brad Pitt's character is a 50-year-old man. And so I'm just like, why are these people talking to each other like this? Like, one assumes that they have, I don't know, wives and families, maybe. Like, they're just. And I just feel like this morning I was reading an article that Mart had sent me about a real tank crew. And in that sense where all the guys who had survived were talking about each other, there was this real sense of like affection and kinship. And like, of course, that's not going to come out all the time, but there's this innate sense that they did actually like give a shit about each other. And you don't get that from these guys at all.
Yeah. My stepmom's dad was on a tank crew in World War II, and he had his tank shot out from underneath them like twice. And he loved those guys. You know what I mean? Like, they were like his guys. Like, they were in there together. Like, he didn't talk about it a lot because it was World War II and he was really fucked up about it. But he had a couple of like letters. We had some letters and stuff that he had written during that time. And like, there was a lot of camaraderie and affection for the people that he was there with experiencing these horrible things.
There's so much there, right? We'll get to it when we finish the plot as well about this actual tank crew that I found. That this is probably a little bit based on, but maybe not really, because it would have been so much better if it had been based on this crew. But the idea of this movie has so much potential and it just does not come out.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it especially frustrating to watch. It sort of inches toward that area of being really good a couple times, and then David Ayer just makes these choices that it's like, you just destroyed everything you were building. Why this?
Yeah, Hollywood owes us a good new tank movie, I think.
Yeah, they can call me. I can do this.
Literally, though, you get your spreadsheet out.
Listen! So by this point, the tank has fully stopped. One of the tracks on one of its wheels has come off, like the long tread that goes around the various gears that turn it. So Norman's keeping watch. The guys are like looking through this sort of farm, like dilapidated abandoned farmhouse to see like maybe there's a tank tread in there. And it's like, okay, sure, maybe there is. And Norman comes running up and he's like, BT dubs, there's like 300 SS guys coming up the road. And we have established at the beginning of the movie with a scene where Don nearly fights an SS guy that he really especially hates the SS. Like, he hates all Nazis, but these Nazis in particular he can't stand. The crew is like, we gotta dip, we're gonna die. And Don's like, but I hate the SS, so I wanna stay. And Norman, for some reason, is like, yeah, let's stay. And all the other guys are like, well, I don't want to be the pussy who leaves. And so they agree to stay too.
Literally. Why does Norman want to stay? Like, what? I don't know.
Yeah, like, this man has done nothing. The implication is that there has been some lesson about loyalty that Norman has learned, and I just haven't seen it. I just haven't seen it happen.
No, but wait, you forget that he's now a hardened man because he had two sort of traumatic experiences and now he's a different man. I mean, don't forget.
Yeah. There was,
you mean the two traumatic experiences that were directly caused by the man that he's choosing to stay with?
Yeah, some Stockholm Syndrome-esque behavior. There's a part where he's in the tank, like, just mowing down Germans, and he seems, all of a sudden, he just loves it now. He's like, best job in the world. And you're like, no, right, dude.
I've got the bloodlust. My soul turned into a horse and left my body. So now I can do it.
Oh my God. Sidebar. So much of the dialogue in this movie cracks me up because it's just so cliche. Like, we were talking about how a couple times in this movie they say like, you're the only one that can do it, or like, where's the rest of the platoon? We are the rest of the platoon, like that kind of shit. It was just like, every time it happened, I was like, take a drink.
Yeah.
I also don't understand. Dawn has one line that's like a tagline for the movie, I think, and I don't understand what it means.
Are you thinking ideals are peaceful, history is violent?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Can we talk about that line for a second? What does it mean? What is he trying to say?
I don't know.
What is this movie trying to say? Is it trying to say anything?
Well, I think it thinks it is, and it comes back to a lot of that whole like, because my dad is kind of one of these guys. He's like, if somebody broke into my home, I would shoot them without remorse. And I'd be like, cool, that's a really extreme reaction. I hope that I would at least try to discover, well, what's happening. You know what I mean? I know that there's a lot of situations where like conversation is not going to solve a problem. I understand that. And like, if somebody like tried to fight me, I'd fight back. Like, I'm not going to just sit here and take it. If I'm being assaulted or whatever, like, I'm not going to not try to do something to stop this. But it's that thing of we've only won because of the violence. And it's like, that was part of it, maybe arguably even like the biggest part, but also like part of the reason that things are won is because of alliances and because of compromises and because of legislation changes and because of people who have been conscripted to work in factories not putting explosives in live rounds, but instead leaving pieces of paper that say, I fucking hope you survive. Like, acts of compassion are parts of the reason that wars are won too. And especially dudes don't really like to acknowledge that. You know?
I think you've just summed up the reason why I don't like this movie, and I didn't realize it before, but it's just because it's one-dimensional. It's just all about this one specific thing about war, which is not realistic, really.
Well, I think like the statement, ideals are peaceful, history is violence, is just very pat. It's very like, yeah, okay, that sounds good, but like, what does that actually mean? Like once you pick it apart.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like one of the most famous stories that people tell from World War II is the football game. You know what I mean? Like the two opposing sides. And I can't remember where they were. But it's like, it's Boxing Day or Christmas Eve or some crazy shit, and there's no shelling happening, and the guys don't know what's going on, but they're all tired. And one, I don't remember if it was like Americans or Germans that started things or like which specific, but they started playing football together.
Editing Marcia here. One of the most familiar accounts of this was actually during World War I, during the Christmas truce, and it involved numerous football matches played in no man's land.
Anyway, point being that like it's like if you wanted to make a one-dimensional cool tank movie, but then you like didn't even have fun. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna make a one-dimensional cool tank movie, make a fucking one-dimensional cool tank movie and have a great fucking time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So they hide inside the tank and wait for the hundreds of Germans to approach them. And this is where Norman gets his nickname Machine for being such a good shot. And they take out loads of Germans, but ultimately most of the crew is killed. And it's supposed to make you feel sad, but it didn't really work for me.
This is the only scene in the whole movie where I thought maybe David Ayer was having fun.
And I will say, again, like as an action fan, it is a cool scene. It is a cool, loud, explosive, fun. The bit where like there's a guy coming down into the tank and he like stabs him and stuff. Like there's a lot of really cool cinematic, like, adrenaline moments.
You know what happens to me, though? I then think, wait, these tanks lock on the inside. Why are they coming into the tank?
Well, he climbed out for something.
For guns, because they ran out of ammo.
Yeah.
There's also something to be said, too, for the fact that they're mowing down Germans for so long, and then the Germans seem to remember that they had anti-tank guns. It's just like, why did y'all not do this immediately?
Delete? Like...
It reminds me a little bit of a zombie movie. This entire scene is kind of, the Germans are just zombies. I think if they had been zombies, it would have been a better movie.
That would actually be extremely cool. And like, not to belabor a point, but also there's the floor hatch. There's the floor hatch.
Get out!
Any of these guys could have just rigged a whole bunch of explosives in here, shot for a little bit, climbed out the floor hatch, and then detonated from a distance. There were so many choices they could have made that are not the ones they made.
So many choices.
Don actually goes out to shoot the machine gun on top of the tank for a bit, and he's wounded, but then he gets back inside and helps Norman escape via the floor hatch, and Norman hides underneath the tank like a wriggly worm that he is.
Oh my god. Literally, this man is just flailing around under there. I'm like, lay still and play dead. What is your problem? He can't do it. He's flailing.
And it's funny because an SS officer, after they've potatoed the inside of the tank, I forgot what the name is for the actual explosive. I think it's a potato measure. A German SS officer looks under the tank, sees Norman, and decides to let him go. So the German is the good guy for a second. And I thought this was really funny.
I didn't really understand. I know that he was showing mercy, and I guess that's sort of what Norman was doing earlier on in the film when he didn't want to kill those Hitler youths and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the through line of his character seems to be that as the war goes on, he gets worse. And like that's sort of supposed to be a good thing because he matches up with the crew better and he likes to do murder now and stuff. And then it's just like, oh, but we're going to go back to the part where like mercy is supposed to be a big theme. I was like, I don't know. This is murky. Like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this?
I think there's a part of the reason I'm compelled to keep watching this movie is because there's a version of it that mostly just lives in my head and not on the screen, where the point is that these guys have been here for so long that they have forgotten that there is a world where compassion and integrity matter. And this is like that hinge point where Norman sees that the way he wants to do things can succeed. He wants to be compassionate to these Hitler youth. He wants to be compassionate to this guy. He wants to be compassionate to like another German soldier, the one that Don makes him kill. He wants to be compassionate to Emma. He is like having a great moment with her on the piano. And every time he's told, no, 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 no. It's basically a horror movie. It's this young man finally succumbing to all this pressure to like not be a good person. And then what saves his life is an act of integrity from another person who's on the other side. And he now has to live with the fact that he has done all of this stuff. But there's a version of it where like this is the lesson that like this can work. I just don't think that I don't think David Ayer knew what he wanted to do with it, or maybe it was a studio. Maybe it's not his fault. Maybe I'm like putting blame on the wrong person, but it doesn't really seem like he knew what he was trying to say with any of this, or that the studio didn't allow there to be like a through thread of that nature or something. It's like all the guys who think that the Joker is the protagonist, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like they're like, oh, that guy, Don War Daddy Collier. He's great. He's the hero.
Yeah.
No, I actually, everything that you're saying sounds like a fascinating movie, and I wish that it had been.
Yes, I think I would have liked it if that were the actual movie. And I feel like I read somewhere, I don't know if this is just me summing up different pieces of information, but I think it's supposed to be about, is the word ambiguous the right word? About how the war makes you that way and how you then kind of get numb to everything else and you just go through the motions and you stop being human because of the war. And I think that's another point that the movie could be trying to make, is that these guys have been, like you said, they've been out there for so long. They're so like destroyed by the war that they've just lost a sense of what's right and what's wrong and why they're actually fighting. I don't know, I could see that.
Yeah. Well, and Band of Brothers does that really well. It's one of the later episodes when they're in the forest.
Breaking Point?
Where Malarkey is losing his shit. Everybody's dying. Compton gets sent to convalesce because he's just hit a wall. There's a great example of that in that particular episode of Band of Brothers. And it does it so well and elegantly, especially in Western media and like the American view of World War II. I find that there's this really interesting thing that happens where the further removed we get from the time that the war actually happened, there's this shift of meaning where a lot of the guys who were there like talk about they weren't things we enjoyed doing. They were awful things. They're going to stay with us forever, but they were necessary things because we had to win or whatever, right? Like they were necessary or because we had to survive. And I think there's this morphing of this idea of things being tragic but necessary. But instead of it being like tragic but necessary comes to mean to be celebrated, to be admired. It's just this interesting cultural shift of what the definition of that is. And I think this is a really good example of where that fails in terms of like portraying sympathetic or interesting people.
I think you're right. Robert Leckie, who we know from the Pacific, wrote his book, his memoir, Helmet for My Pillow, directly after the war. And you can see that if you read later memoirs, they have a different vibe. They're less honest almost. They are kind of colored by opinions of other people and myth-making, really.
These days, when most of the original guys are gone, a lot of it becomes this almost like nostalgia kick. And it's just like, well...
Anyway, sorry. Again, I will talk about this movie all day if given the chance, and I know we're on a schedule.
Maybe worth noting too that this white horse goes by again. So we saw the white horse at the beginning of the movie, and then during the interminable like lunch that they're having or breakfast in the apartment of the two women, they talk about how when they landed after D-Day, there were all these like German horses that got left behind. So they had to go and just shoot all of these horses. And then now we're seeing a horse goes by again. And when I read the interview with David Ayer and he was like sort of trying to articulate the symbolism of the horse, I don't feel like he really knew what he was doing with that either.
No, he's like saying horses are innocent, are they?
I mean, I love horses. I would not call them innocent.
You know, they have murder in their eyes sometimes.
There's a man-eating horse back in history a bit, which is a really interesting story that I highly recommend everybody looks up. Anyway.
So just to finish it off here, Norman is rescued by a passing group of American soldiers and they tell him that he's a hero. I love the delivery of this line. It's like a medic being like, "You're a hero, man." And then the movie closes on an overhead shot of the tank Fury and it's surrounded by just absolute piles of German corpses.
Similar to the opening scene a little bit. It kind of mirrors that in a way where it's sort of like Fury alone in a field of wreckage.
But to be fair, Fury is always alone. It's always the last tank. They're always fucking alone.
Yeah, this movie knows one trope.
And I don't even know if it knows that trope very well. You know what I mean? Like, it knows one trope, but it's like casual acquaintances with a trope. Not making any intimate commentaries on said trope.
So I did some research because I thought there is no way that there's not an actual tank crew out there that's really cool. Lo and behold, there is a tank crew that is really cool. And there's a tank commander called Lafayette Greenpool, and he was actually called War Daddy. So that was most likely taken as inspiration, I would say. I'm not going to say it was based on him because he's much cooler than War Daddy in this movie could ever be. This tank crew is pretty amazing because they took out 12 tanks and about 260 armored vehicles, which is a lot. I had trouble understanding how much that is, but they also killed over 1,000 German soldiers and had taken 250 more prisoners of war, and they did this in only 81 days. So that's not a very long time to kill that many people. I don't want to glorify killing people, but that's impressive.
I think in the article you had sent me, they told you about like this one mission that they went on that was sort of vaguely similar, I guess, to what happens at the end of Fury, where it's September 1944 and they're going to go on one more mission and then they're all going to get sent home on a war bond drive. And they're all like, well, this is garbage. We don't really want to go home on a war bond drive, but that's all right. And then they go on this mission, and I think one of the dudes gets killed, and another two are pretty grievously wounded, and they don't have a very good day. So, yeah, it's sort of vaguely similar to what happens at the end of Fury, but, you know, more realistic, of course.
Yeah. So this poor guy was actually noted as a very aggressive sergeant, which if David Ayer did base him on that, I guess I could see that. But then again, if you read interviews with him, he never says that it was based on this tank crew, and I don't understand why he didn't make that choice. They commanded 3 different tanks, and they were called In the Mood on their tank. What do you call the thing that sticks out? The barrel of the tank, I guess.
David Ayer clearly drew inspiration from real life and then made a worse version of it.
I'm just looking back through all my Dreamwoods posts from when I was like deep in my original Fury madness, because I fell down this like crazy rabbit hole research. I was on like props websites looking up pieces of costumes and stuff just because I'm, like I said, a crazy person. He based it on Pool, and I want to say that it used to, there's something about he had read like Spearhead or something like the Adam Makos book about tankers, and there was like something about that he had based it on, but I can't remember.
There is another really cool story about, like, if you look at the ending scene, the final battle, Audie Murphy was actually an infantryman, but he won a Medal of Honor for kind of similar to the movie. He had climbed up onto an anti-tank gun, so not an actual tank, but he killed so many men by himself in a way that it sounds really unbelievable, but this actually happened. And this is just one infantryman, but he killed about 50 German soldiers while everybody else was retreating. And then he forced the entire SS battalion to retreat, which is pretty amazing.
Worth mentioning, there's like a bit in the movie where Norman has to clean out the tank and it's full of the splattered remains of Red, their previous gunner, and he throws up. It's very disgusting. But there was actually an ordnance battalion whose job was to clean out the tanks and fix the tanks and all that sort of stuff. And they would have had Fury cleaned and they would have repaired it and painted it and done all that fun stuff. And they were really fast. So they would have done it in about 48 hours. I just thought that was really interesting. It's sort of another one of those little pieces of warfare that you don't necessarily think about. You're like, oh yeah, I guess it would make sense to have it be someone's job to make a tank ready for battle again after, it's been through one.
It's kind of like what we were saying, right? Like there's so many like little weird, interesting choices. Like that choice is clearly just like we're really gonna hammer home that it was like gross and bad. But I don't know if y'all noticed when you were watching in the scene where Don makes Norman kill the German soldier, the pistol that he hands him, it's Don's pistol that he takes out of his jacket and it's got a sweetheart grip on it with a picture of a beautiful woman in it. And so it's like there's so many interesting history correct details in this that I'm like, this is clearly a character detail. Like I know that maybe you're thinking it's just a costuming choice of like, oh cool, we're gonna throw a sweetheart grip, but I'm like,
no,
he sets up so many interesting little intricate details like that and then just absolutely nothing with them. It drives me up the fucking tree. Like,
yeah, I think there's also this thing about he's made other movies in a similar vein. Some dudes like making war movies and that's cool. But I also just find that there's also this fixation on here's the plot and here's all the things that will happen. And it's like, okay, but like, why are these things happening? Like, why are the characters electing to behave in this way? And like, how is what they are doing driving the plot forward? And like, how are their actions informed by anything else that's happening? It's like, there has to be some kind of like, not to say that everything has to be 100% character driven all the time, but we should be following these characters rather than like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a certain level of buy-in it seems like he expects from his audience to be like, these are World War II guys, so we're going to come into this movie thinking that they're like, good dude, like heroes, right? So it almost feels like he doesn't feel like he has to earn the audience like loving the characters because all he shows, we don't know that any of these guys, with the exception of maybe Bible, who is my favorite, but also does functionally nothing the whole movie. There's nothing to tell us that they're good people or that they ever were. And if they weren't, that's also really interesting. He's trying to have his cake and eat it too on this one a little bit. And I'm like, buddy, no, you gotta earn your cake, babe. Come on.
Storytelling. Tell some story.
I know I've got a degree in storytelling, so maybe I have stronger opinions about it than most, but my boy, my guy, my buddy, come on.
Anytime I see a movie like this, I'm like, I know people who would have done a way better job making this movie, whether it's writing or directing or whatever. I'm just like, this could have been something and it's not, and it's frustrating.
Yeah. And to all the people out there who are like, well, then why don't you do it yourself? I am doing it myself. I'm working on that. So maybe in a couple of years, I'll be able to be like, hey, there's a better tank movie now.
Will you come on our podcast when you do?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You heard it here first.
All right, so we should rate this movie, and we were thinking, based on the super cliche dialogue, we would rate it, "You're all we've got," out of 10. But when you say it, you have to say it like you're a battle-hardened Jason Isaacs telling his men that they have to go into battle. So you have to, give it the appropriate gravitas. So we'll start with Mart. How many "You're all we've got" out of 10 would you give this movie?
I don't want to do this.
You can do it.
I do want to do this. I'm gonna give it a 1. You're all we've got out of 10. Because I'm just angry I watched this movie. I want my 2 hours back. I want to unsee it. I want to never see it again. You're welcome.
Great. Okay. Beck, how many "You're all we've got" out of 10 would you give this movie?
Okay, so I'm gonna give it 4. You're all we've got, because I do think that for a certain type of person, it's worth watching at least once. I don't really think it's worth watching twice for anyone, even though I have watched it upwards of 30 times. But I'm giving it an extra. I would give it 3, but I'm giving it an extra because also it has motivated me to want to make a better tank movie. And I'm desperate to make that happen in life now, so that this is not one of the ones people think of when they think about tank movies.
I mean, that's valid.
Yeah.
So my lowest rating I think I've ever given was I gave Pearl Harbor a 3 And so I'm also going to give this movie 3 "You're all we've got" out of 10 because at least Pearl Harbor, I more or less enjoyed the Michael Bay battle scenes. You can just shut your brain off and be like, this looks cool. And there was some of that in this movie, but it's losing points for me because of that long, fraught scene in the middle that was very like rapey. And yeah, but as soon as I started watching it again, I was like, wait a minute, I didn't like this enough the first time to watch it again.
I will say too, Jason Isaacs, only person in the whole movie that feels like a real guy and not just a character of a person. And I don't know why that is, but I feel like it's very true.
Yeah,
and he only has about 2 lines, so that's saying something.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we should talk about what we're reading. Mart, are you reading anything?
I am struggling to listen to a number of things. I'm still listening to Mercury Pictures, which I don't know if you finished it yet, but I'm struggling to get through it, but I will finish because I promise. And I just found, we were talking about this off air, I found the book, a Dutch book called, in English it's called The Assault. It's like a classic Dutch book about a war story. So I'm reading that again, and I'm really enjoying it. It's making me feel 16 and in high school.
There's like a movie, right? You had said that we could maybe cover?
Yeah, there's a movie with English subtitles that we could definitely cover, and it's not bad. It's not a bad movie.
Those English subtitles are going to be real necessary because I would struggle. Otherwise. I recently finished reading A Wing and a Prayer, the Harry Crosby memoir, which I liked a lot. It definitely moved up into my top 5 war memoir rankings.
How about you, Beck?
Not anything World War II, but I can talk about one of my favorite World War II books. So there's this book, Terror in the Starboard Seat. It's a quick read. It's short. And it's a memoir about a guy who is a navigator in a Mosquito in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And at one point, he is paired with an American Jew who joined the war early by going up to Canada and joining the Royal Canadian Air Force. And it's like the two of them together. The pilot was this kind of like everything you hope that like a movie pilot in a World War II movie would be, right? Like he's like a little unhinged in terms of like he's willing to take some risks. He's got this like big personality. It's a great read. It's really fun. I don't know if it's in publication at this moment in time, but I know it was up until recently, and you can still find plenty of copies of it on like eBay and stuff, but it's fantastic. One of my favorites I've ever read.
Nice. I'll definitely check that out. I love a Canada mention. I say that all the time.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to listen, if I do say so myself, another great episode of Rosie the Reviewer. Thanks so much to our guest, Beck. That was so great to have you on. Obviously, you have rabbit holed hard about this movie, and I love that. You can follow us at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast on Instagram. You can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com. And is there anything else? Did I forget anything?
You can rate us 5 stars if you want on any of the podcast platforms. And we're also on IMDb if you fancy checking us out for no reason.
Hell yeah. For fun.
Sweet.
Next week on Rosie the Reviewer, you can catch us talking about Hacksaw Ridge, featuring Andrew Garfield, and we're very excited about that.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.